With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Ayin Aleph. We started the sugya of Ula saying in the name of Rebbe Elazar that any voluntary shlamim, a neder and a dava, any shlamim that's brought on the 14th, and as we will be learning on Daf Ayin Aleph, that meat from all of the korbanei shlamim may be consumed for 2 days. So if you offer a korban on the 14th, you can eat it all on the 14th, but you are allowed to allow some of the meat to be consumed on the 15th. And as we have been learning, that there is a mitzvah to have shalmei chagiga. There is a mitzvah to have shalmei simcha. And as we explained, shalmei chagiga is an obligation to bring. Shalmei simcha simply means there's an obligation to eat kosher meat throughout the whole Yom Tov. Nevertheless, says Ula in the name of Rabbi Elazar, that shlamim that you brought on the 14th will not allow you to fulfill your obligation, not only not of the Shalmei Chagiga, not even of the Shalmei Simcha. We're going to learn the klal that we already spoke out, that anything that you have to bring as an obligation, anything that is a choiva, has to come only from chulin. We're going to learn more about Simcha that we get from eating meat, that we're going to learn in the Gemara that the eating raw meat does not give us that Simcha. On the other hand, the eating sacrificial meat, which is connected to eating meat, isn't the only way to fulfill the mitzvah of simcha. It's the ideal way, but there is a concept of mesamchoi, biksus nekiya. You can fulfill your simcha by having special clean garments for Yom Tov. You can fulfill the simcha by drinking, by consuming old wine, yain yashin. And then we're going to have Ravin's version of what Rabbi Elazar said. B'chlal, a big part of today's daf will be to show us from where do we know that even though the emurim of the shlamim, those the parts that have to be burnt on the altar, have to be burnt that day or that night to follow the subsequent night, and after which you're going to have noisar, but the meat of shlamim can always be eaten for 2 days, and proofs from different psukim v'chulei. And on daf ayin aleph amid beis, we're going to have a gavaldik new Mishnah. Now, we have been learning, number one, Pesach overrides Shabbos. And therefore, even if the 14th falls out on Shabbos, you bring the korban Pesach. On the other hand, if for whatever reason the Pesach becomes invalid, l'cho'ura, the person who brought it was mechalel Shabbos b'shoigeg, for which normally yechayev chatas. However, we will learn a machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yeshua will subscribe to the concept that a toya b'dvar mitzvah is spotted from achatas, which means that if the person's intention was to do a mitzvah, even if it turned out that, as we'll give certain examples, not all examples, certain examples, the Pesach turned out not to be valid, Rabbi Yeshua says he won't even be chayiv chatas, because since the intent was to do a mitzvah, so he was toya b'dvar mitzvah, and we'll see how Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. We'll see another back and forth in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, and even Rabbi Yeshua limits the Torah b'dvar Mishnah, and he doesn't apply it across the board. Chavra, let us start on Ayin Aleph Amid Aleph. We left off 12 lines from the top of the Amid. We got down already a little bit into the Amid. All of this was just, again, to back up Ula's version of Rabbi Elazar, as we had at the end of Daf Ayin, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that Shlamim, Sheshachten, Mei Erev Yantiv. We're not only speaking about Chagigas Yudalid, that also, any korban that's brought before Yom Tov, Eina Yoitze Behen, Loi Mishum Simcha, and certainly not Mishum Chagiga. Okay. Says the Gemara Masiv Rabbi Yosef. Guys, we learned this Braisa on top of Daf Ayin. Oh, and the Braisa says that Chagigas Arba Asar. This Braisa is speaking about the korban that is, according to the Rabbanan, sometimes when needed, brought with the korban Pesach. Yoitze ba Mishum Simcha. The Braisa says clearly that Mishum Simcha, you fulfill your obligation. It's only that Eina Yoitze ba Mishum Chagiga. Like we explained, Chagiga, Shalmei Chagiga is an obligation to bring, and Kol Davar Shebechoyve Eina ba Ela Min HaChulin. This is not called Chulin. Masha Enkein, the mitzvah of Shalmei Simcha is not to bring the korban, but it's to consume kosher meat. So who cares? That's L'choyre the way. Now, when we learned it yesterday, we typed it correct. But when you read the Braisa, it sounds clearly that Chagigas Arba Asar is good for you to fulfill the obligation of Shalmei Simcha. This mamish appears Tana, how can Ula Amar Rabbi Elazar say the opposite? And Amai, so answers, clarifies Amar Rav Idi Bar Ovin that the case of the Braisa that we just quoted is not that the person actually shechted the Chagigas Yudalid, which is something that sometimes we do. No, if you shechted it on the 14th, no, the Braisa never meant to say that you can eat some of its meat, or if you have some of its meat, then you fulfilled your Shalmei Simcha. B'chlal, that's not what it meant. It meant is that if you designated a shlamim to be used as Chagigas Arba Asam, but for whatever reason, She'ikev, you did not bring it. According to Ben Tema, it's problematic. According to our Mishnah, no problematic. You're not mechuyev to bring it. People realize that there's very few pre-registered people, or they realize that the animal is very large, or for a wrong reason, they didn't bring it. If it wasn't slaughtered and now you shechted it on the 15th, that is what the Braisa is saying. That is what the Braisa is saying, is that since it was already designated to be brought on the 14th, so it's not called a chulin animal. And because of the klal of kol davar shebachayve eino ba ela min achulin, so the Braisa wants to tell you it's not good for the Shalmei Chagiga, but it's good for the Shalmei Simcha. But why is it good for the Shalmei Simcha? Because you shechted it on the 15th. That is the case of the Braisa. Gewaldig. And because the Ivloi Tema Hachem, that the Braisa would actually mean that even if you shechted it on the 14th, it's going to be good for Shalmei Simcha. Hamas Nisa, this Braisa, Man Ketanila. Who actually, when we clarified, who learns the Braisa, right? Ben Tema. Problem is, and we showed that on yesterday's daf. The problem is Ben Tema, Hapasla Labalina. Not only does Ben Tema hold that you have to bring the 14th, whether you need the meat or not, you're mechoyev to bring Chagigas Yudalid, and you bring it b'Shabbos, and you bring it b'Tumah, but it's mamish like a Pesach, including by the fact that its meat can only be eaten for 1 day and 1 night. Like we really explained, it doesn't even mean 1 day. The Pesach cannot be eaten during the day. And according to what the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, you can't even eat it midaraisa the whole night. It means for a very limited amount of time. The next morning, it's already nicer. So how can the Braisa B'chlal be saying, since it is Ben Tema, that you can be Yotzei Shalmei Simcha? How did you have the meat? You're not allowed to have the meat. It's nicer if you shechted it on the 14th. Beautiful. So Shema Mino, that this Braisa is speaking about the animal that was designated to be brought, but the actual shechita took place on the 15th, and yet the chiddush is that it's not good for the Shalmei Chagiga because it's not chulin. Okay, Masav Rava, again, on the version of Ula Amar Rabbi Elazar, it says in a Mishnah and Sukkah, that the mitzvah of saying Hallel, the rabbinic mitzvah of saying Hallel, and the biblical mitzvah of Vahasimcha, of Shalmei Simcha, is, when it comes to the holiday of Sukkah, it's Shemaina. And we learned this yesterday. Shitas Rashi, Shemaina means that it goes also into the night of Shmini Atzeres. On Shmini Atzeres, you don't have to bring another Shalmei Simcha. Of course, if you have meat, you can eat it. But Shemaina means that on every day, and don't forget by Kachim Halaylo Hoylach Acharayim, so the meat that you slaughtered, if you needed to slaughter meat on the final day of Sukkot, on the 7th day of Sukkot, is the Shlamim, right? That meat is eaten at the night as well. So you already ate the meat and you're obligated to be Mesameach in the night of Shmini Atzeres. Says the Gemara, asks Rabba, V'i Omrad Bi'inan Zvicha Bishas Simcha. How do you have 8 days? Hazin and Sagian, there'll be sometimes that you will only have this Shalmei Simcha for 7 days. For example, Shechal Yom Tov Harishain, Liyos B'Shabbos, like we spoke out yesterday, when Shabbos is during Chol HaMoed, being against Shlomim can be eaten for 2 days. So you shechted it Friday on Yom Tov, and you can have it on Friday and on Shabbos. But in the case where the first day of Yom Tov is on Shabbos, again, if you don't follow Ula Amar Rabbi Elazar, also not a problem. Shechted on Friday, and on the first day, you're going to have the Shlomim meat, which will be your Shalmei Simcha. But now that we're saying that, no, Shalmei Simcha, even though the mitzvah is not to bring it, the mitzvah is only to eat it, but you have to shecht it on Yom Tov for Shalmei Simcha. So sometimes you're not going to have 8 days. So Amar Rafuna Bereid Rav Yehuda, that in the case where the first day falls out on Shabbos, so Mesamchai B'Seirei Haragolim. Don't forget that on Shabbos, I know that Shalmei Simcha is not Doiches Shabbos, but the karbanos that have to be brought on Yom Tov, right? And as she says, the chatos that's brought on that day is eaten by the kahanim. Now, hold on. How, and every chatos is eaten by the kahanim. Now, how will the kohen's eating of sacrificial meat help me, a Yisrael, fulfill my obligation of eating sacrificial meat? The Gemara is going to ask in a moment. But there's going to be an achila of kachim. Amar Rava against Rafuna. 1 second. Shtei tshuvas b'davar. Number one, he tells him, Chada de seirei harigolim chay necholim tzliyen necholim. This is very important. True, these chatois hatzibur are brought on Shabbos. It's good to remember the klolim. What's the main part of the avodah? The zrika. And even though that kohanim oichlin mubalam eschaprin, 100%, but since you can eat the meat of a chatos that day and that night, so the cooking or the roasting of the meat of a chatos may never be done on Shabbos. No, it's a bimayadoi. It's a carbon that has to come on a specific time. It's a chiyuv. Fine. So shchita you have to do. But anything that does not need to be done on Shabbos may not be done on Shabbos. Now, the kahanim, if they want, they can eat it raw. If they want, they can eat it raw. The problem is, or they can wait until Matzah Shabbos. But you can't tell me that since the seirim that are bought on a golem are taka bought even on Shabbos, so that allows everyone to fulfill the simcha. First of all, we're not eating it. That's the second kasha. But let's go to the kahanim. If the kahanim eat it on Shabbos, they can only eat raw meat. And the simcha b'chai leka. So number one. And just to know, either they would taka eat it raw, or they would wait until Matzah Shabbos, which is also young, right, going into Chol HaMoed, and then they would be allowed to prepare it any way they want. But you're missing the 8 days. You don't eat it on Shabbos. And v'oid kohanim oichlin v'Yisrael b'mem esamchin. And what do you think Rav Huna held? The Stam Rav Huna b'rei Rav Vida held. Number one is that you get simcha by eating raw meat. Maybe you see today in the world there's a lot of things that people are eating raw. I don't know. And another thing, some Yidden are that way. The Yisrael is happy because the Kohen has meat. But anyways, Rava disagrees with that. So Elo Amarav Papa, another tenets. Enochanami normally simcha, and which is why we bring the Shalmei simcha. It has to do with eating meat, but again, sacrificial meat. However, when you may not, you can fulfill it in another way. That misamcha biksus nekiya, that you have to wear special clean garments for Shabbos Yontif. Here we're speaking about Yontif, the Ayin Yashon. So therefore, this does not refute Ula's version of Rab Lazar. So we did not refute him, but now says the Gemara, here's a chayin. Everything we learned was only what Ula is saying in the name of Rab Lazar, because Kiyasir Ravin, he came to Babel from the Holy Land, quoting the same Rabbi Elazar, but he had another version of what Rabbi Elazar said. That Shlavim sheshachtan mi'erev Yontif. He said, mamish, the opposite. And like we keep on emphasizing, to appreciate the difference between Shalmei Chagiga and Shalmei Simcha. Shalmei Chagiga, like Oilas Re'iyah, is a Choivas Gavra. I have to bring it. Shalmei Simcha, the mitzvah is not to bring it. The mitzvah is to eat it. And Enochanami, that was the whole vart of Rabbi Elazar. I don't even care if it was brought a day prior. If not for the dinam of Neisar, if not for the limits of time, I don't care if I brought it a week earlier. I just won't have the meat because shlamim can only be eaten for 2 days and not longer. And that was this whole vart. Again, that's, by the way, that Rambam, as you see here in the top, Paskins like Ravin's version. Shlamim that sheshachtan me'erev yamtiv yoytza behen mishum simcha. Hashem did not oblige us for the simcha, for the shalmei simcha to bring it, to eat it. And if you have meat from yesterday, good. Elama ve'ein yoytza me'en mishum chagigam. Yoytza mishum simcha, because loy ba'inan zvicha b'shas simcha. I don't care if the shechita happened before Yom Tov. However, loy mishum chagiga, because shalmei chagiga is an obligation on every Jew to bring. So it's a chayva. So and the rule is havadav shebachayva. The chol davar shebachayva einoi ba'a ela min hachulin. And now some of what we're going to have, we already learned above. So meisvei on Ravin's version.
So in a year where Shabbos is the first day Pesach, there's no chagiga or no chiyuv of chagiga on the first day.
No. 1 second, slow down. Correct. Okay, two things. I thought you were speaking about the chiddush. When first, let's go back to the Massiv Rabbi Yosef from today. When the first day is on Shabbos, so they would bring a chagiga on Friday, and they would eat the meat on Shabbos, and they would have the full 8 days of Shalmei Simcha.
But
Correct.
That's Yatzei Simcha, but it's not Yatzei Chagiga.
That's right. And why is it? Yeah. And another thing, Danny asked, what about bringing it on Shabbos? It's not Doiche Shabbos. Because the Shalmei Chagiga has Tashlumen. It's not a real Bimayadoi. Because, and normally we're not telling people to delay it. But any carbon that if you delay it, you don't lose it, a carbon Pesach, if I didn't bring it on Erev Pesach during that afternoon period, I lost it. But if you have an opportunity to compensate, so then it's not Doiche Shabbos. Okay. So again, guys, the first white line, it says in a Braisa, when it says in Parshas Re'eh, v'hayisa ach someach, ach someach is l'rabbis, leile yom tov ha'achrein, Sukkot is 7 days, but the night going into the 8th, the night going into Shmini Atzeres is also included in v'hayisa ach someach, this concept of eating meat, but again, not stam meat, eating kosher meat, sacrificial meat. Maybe maybe so says the Braisa, since the Torah says and but right, it qualifies, it limits chilek. So what are we excluding? We are excluding Leila Yom Tov Rishon. Now we got a problem. Bishleim, according to Ula's version of Rabbi Lazar, it makes sense. Why are we excluding the first night? Because how would you have sacrificial meat the first night if you have to shecht it during Yom Tov? Makes sense. But now that you're telling me Rabban's version is Rabbi Lazar never said what Ula said. Rabbi Lazar actually allows for you to shecht a carbon on Erev Yom Tov and for you to be yoytze the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov with its meat. So fragt the Gemara, my Tama, why are we excluding the first night? Lav mishum de ein lo b'meh yismach. Because we don't agree with Rava's version, because Ula's correct, and therefore, if you have to shecht it on Yom Tov, guys, we can't shecht at night. No, this fits perfectly, but only according to Ula. So the Gemara says, guys, we just had this loloi. Really, Ravan is correct. If you would have shechted it before, if you would have, that meat could be used to be yoytze the mitzvah of Simchas, Yom Tov, of Shalmei Simcha. However, at the end of the day, there is an ach is chilek, so we're going to include one additional time, but we're going to exclude another additional time. So we always, that's the rule, that's a rule. Whenever you have to add something, you add that which is, so to say, a minor novelty. If you want to add a major novelty, you have to prove it. The onus of proof is on the one who's adding. And adding the last night, the night into Shmini Atzeres, is a lesser of a chiddush. We explained that concept. Once you are into something, to extend it a bit is not that difficult. The initiation is more difficult. So, the Braisa itself says that Ma'ira Isal Rabbis Leila Yom Tov Ha'achrein, Ulohoitzi Leila Yom Tov Harishoin. Right, this Braisa is speaking about clearly. Marbani Leila Yom Tov Ha'achrein, because since Sheyesh Simcha Lefanav, you are already in a time, or the time preceding the last night already had an obligation. So it's not such a gross novelty to extend it. So we apply it on that which is a lesser novelty. Because if Hashem Taka would have meant, then it's a much bigger chiddush. That means you have to begin it earlier. Guys, that's it. This concludes the sugya. Ula Amar Rabbi Lazar, and then we have today
Rabbi, can I ask, is it? It seems quite clear. I mean, I don't understand why they're having such an issue with the night before, the night of. It all seemed, what was the big problem with these rabbis as far as deciding when they're going to have the sacrifice, when it's a simcha? It seems.
Well, really the issue is whether Ula's right or whether Ravan is right. Don't forget, at night, when Yom Tov comes in, Reuven, you can't shecht at night. So if God is telling me that I must eat sacrificial meat for me to fulfill my obligation of rejoicing, that would imply that I have to slaughter it before Yom Tov. And certainly, according to Ula, that does not work.
I understand.
Okay, right. Omar Rav Kahana. Guys, Bechlal, we're taking it as a given, but this is the source now. That Shlamim has an interesting rule. Most Karbanis have 1 day and 1 night. And therefore, there's a certain consistency that which must be offered to God, meaning that which must be burnt on the altar, what we call the emurim. The emurim comes from the word amar, that which God said, that should go on the mizbeach. It should be burnt the day that the blood was applied on the altar and the subsequent night, yom v'layla, And the meat that we eat, and by the way, we can only begin eating it after everything that needs to go on the altar was burnt on the altar, has the same time. Shlamim is the big exception. And not all shlamim. A toid is 1 day and 1 night. But generally, shlamim is 2 days and 1 night. Where do we get that from? Maybe just like the emurim cannot be overnighted. That means that if you left those fats beyond the first night, that's it. It's not good. It's nice, or it's invalid. Maybe the meat also. So Amar Rav Kahana. Minayin le'emurai chagigas chamisha asar. Now he's focusing on the shalmei chagiga, which is one type of shlamim. Shenifsalin belina. Now Rashi makes it clear that we're not only speaking about the emurim over here. The emurim over here have to be burnt the first night. Look, what's Rav Kahana's question? In other words, the meat can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So maybe the emurim can also be burnt on the next day. Again, even though he's focusing on chagigas chamisha asar, this is a generic question on all shlamim. The emurim has a greater restriction. Shenemar, and he has a pasuk, and the pasuk is in Parshas Mishpatim. The pasuk writes, "V'lo yolin chelet chagi ad boiker," right? The fat of my chagiga, says God, right, shall not be overnighted till the morning. Now, here you go. That's the answer, right? You shecht it today, so you have the emurim today. You have it at night, and in the morning you can't overnight it till the morning. No, Rav Kahana says that's not enough. That maybe when God writes the words ad boiker, how do you know these are the words? That boiker is boiker rishon. Maybe it's boiker sheni. In other words, maybe this boiker is not the day after you slaughtered it, which is really what it is. Which means that the emurim can only be burnt the day that the carbon was offered and that night. The next morning, the boiker rishon, it's nicer. Maybe boiker means boiker sheni. And I'll tell you why boiker might mean boiker sheni, not from reading the words, because the meat of the carbon can be eaten the next day. It doesn't become possible lina. Now the meat can only be eaten during the day. And by shkia, by the end of the day, you're done. You're not allowed to leave anything over. Maybe the emurim has even more time to be brought. In other words, until the boiker sheni. So Rav Kahana is going to prove that this is not the case, but he needs to have a reason. Because in the verse that he's quoting in Parshas Mishpatim, the next verse is speaking about something else. The next verse begins that the reishis bekurei ad mascham, that the bikurim, that the first grown of the 7 minim that grows in Eretz Yisrael is tavi beis Hashem Elokecha. So the next word after boiker, it says reishis. So the drush is a boiker means rishon. Lememra the high boiker rishon. Chevra, from here until the Mishnah, make one thing clear. No one is disagreeing with what Rav Kahana is saying. Everyone knows, that's the rule by Shlamim, that generally, even though the meat can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night, it's really day, night, day. The emurim is not day, night, day, day, night. But the problem we're going to have from here until the end, until the Mishnah is, why did Rav Kahana even need to bring the verse in Mishpatim that juxtaposes the word boiker to reishis? To bring a raya, boiker reishis, which means that if not for that, maybe boiker will mean boiker sheni. The question will still be, there'll be no answer now. The question will be that he's so right that he didn't even need a proof. Whenever the Torah says ad boiker means by default boiker rishon. Okay, so maskiv la Rabbi Yosef, what time the cause of reishis? You need absaz adrush. Oh, la cause of reishis. What hava mina that maybe boiker means boiker sheni? First of all, it's not logical. Why is it not logical? Because shlamim, guys, cannot be eaten for 2 days and 2 nights. Shlamim can only be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Excuse me. If boiker would mean boiker sheni to burn the emurim, you know what we would be saying? The meat has a greater limitation. Only the day, the following night, and the following day. The fats? Today, tonight, tomorrow night. Only boiker sheni, it's nicer. What's more chamor? What do you think? The emurim or the meat? The emurim is more chamor. Anything that goes on the altar, for so many dinim, we're going to learn this, guys, in Kachim. Just for example, the meat of the shlamim can be taken to the Holy Yerushalayim. It doesn't become puzzle if it leaves the place of the temple. Anything that has to go on the altar, if you take it out of the Makam Azora, it's puzzle already because Yoitza, it's more chamor. Doesn't make sense. The basar if me'urta. Me'urta means from the night going into the second day, because you have 2 days but only one night. And you're telling me that if Boiker would have meant Sheni, the emurim would mean Asafra, so like Sechnish. The emurim is more chamor, so the time restraint should be more restrictive. You should have less time, not more time. That's the logical question, not against the rule of Rav Kahana, but why did he even need that pasuk and that smichus in Mishpatim? So Amalei Abaye, who one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Yosef, we do find such a thing. Harei Pesach, that according to the Tanach Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Chevre, the basat ifsalei machatzois. This is great. That the meat you have to eat until midnight. Biblically, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and the emurim, according to everyone, the first Mishnah in Brachos, even though midrabanan we try to finish burning the fats by midnight, kedei laharchik adam minhu aveda, but the emurim, even of the Pesach, you can eat until the morning. So you do already find a scenario where the meat,
not eat the whole night. You can burn the whole night.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Good. That the meat is more restrictive, only until midnight, but the emurim can be burnt the whole night. Okay. So Amar Rava. So Abaya responded to Rabbi Yosef's question. So Rava says, Rabbi Yosef, 1 second. Rabbi Yosef's kasha was a good kasha. You don't remember exactly what he asked. His words were, mi ikamida. Is there any possibility that Boiker Sheni, should mean Boiker Sheni? Can't be. The logic is not what Rabbi Yosef said for you to have a response to it. Why did Rabbi Yosef say mi ikamida? It's not shayach that Boiker means Boiker Sheni, not because of a logic, but because of a braisa. The ilu Tana, there is a Tana that will speak out in a moment. Le basar, when it comes to a din of basar, loy boyer reishis, as we'll learn in a moment. Or like we can already look inside the Rashi. Look inside the second to last of the narrow lines of Rashi. That anoch hazin and Tana de masnisom. There's a brisa that we will quote. The lakama. The afilu le basar. The next brisa that we will be discussing will be about the meat. Shukal me'emurim. He doesn't eat up the extra word reishis. And uboiker diksiv bei mashmalei latana boiker rishon. De facto, by shlamim, boiker doesn't mean boiker rishon. But the Bryce is going to have a ganze drasha. How do we know that the basar of the shlamim can be eaten for 2 days? And he has to prove it. If you have to prove that the word boiker that's written for bsar shlamim means boiker sheni, if you have to prove it, what's the default? The default is boiker means boiker rishon. That was Rabbi Yosef's kasha. Let's read it. Look, go back inside. The second to last line of the Gemara. The ilu, the Tana that we will quote right now, regarding that's discussing about the time to consume the meat of the shlamim. He didn't need a reishis. Fakert, the Braisa needed to prove that boiker means boiker sheni, and Rav Kahana says that the pasuk regarding the time limit for the burning of the emurim, you need a reishis, which means that without the word reishis, boiker by default would mean boiker sheni. It's not true. Default boiker means boiker rishon. And now Rava is telling his Chaver Abaye, this is the Braisa based on which Rav Yosef challenged Rav Kahana. The Tanya. Pasuk in A, loyolin min habasar. Guys, this pasuk is speaking about the meat. Loyolin min habasar asher tizbach bo'erev b'yom harishon. The meat that was slaughtered on the eve of the first day. The first day is the 15th. The eve is the 14th. So you shecht it on the 14th. So don't overnight that meat b'yom harishon la boiker. Now, this pasuk, if we're speaking about a shlamim that's brought on the eve of the 15th, we're speaking about Nisan. So what are we talking about? Guys, we're familiar with this. This is the Chagigas Yudalid. The Chagigas Yudalid is brought ba'erev b'yom harishon. Now, how long do you have to eat that meat for? Forget about Ben Tema. We're putting Ben Tema aside. We're going about an hour chachamim. So you have the 14th, the night of the 15th, and the 15th. So la boiker would mean that when did you violate the lina? You should have eaten it on the 15th. You violated the lina on the 16th. This la boiker, means boiker sheni. But we're going to have to prove it. That will be the whole kasha. Daf ayin aleph. And before we go to the back and forth, the whole point is that this brayse is going to prove that boiker means boiker sheni, which implies that without a raya, boiker normally means boiker rishon. And all of that, therefore, is a kasha, not on the rule of Rav Kahana, but on the need of the smichos. Says the brayse, daf ayin aleph amud beis limeid. This is telling you al chagigas yudalid, not like ben Taimah. It's not like Pesach. It's brought on the 14th. You're not obligated to finish eating it in the night of the 15th. You can eat it on the day of the 15th. So it counters the Gemara. Hold on, how do you know that? How do you know that's pshat? So says the B'raisa, no, it can't be that, because when it says Bayoim Harishoin La Boiker, see, that's the word. Bayoim Harishoin, you slaughtered it Bo'erev. That's the first period. Bayoim Harishoin means the 15th. 15th is night of the 15th, the day of the 15th. And after the Torah says the words Bayoim Harishoin, then it says La Boiker. So because of it saying Bayoim Harishoin La Boiker, here Boiker must mean Boiker Sheni. Boiker Sheni Yomar. And if Boiker would have meant the next morning, then the words Bayoim Harishoin is extra. So that's good. Now the next words are very enigmatic. And the Gemara is going to have to explain it. But still, the B'raisa says, even though it says, Bayoim Harishoin, La Boiker, Meimoi Oyenoi Ela Boiker Rishon, and Umani Mekayim Chagiga, Anachelis L'Shnayom V'Alecha Chutz Mizu. Now, we do know that the Shlamims and Chagigas are included. It's a type of carbon Shlamim. Generally, Shlamim can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Well, maybe it goes to another type of Chagiga. Let's say the Chagiga that's brought on the 15th. That can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. But how do we know? Maybe this pasuk of the A, which is speaking about Chagigas Yudalid, maybe it's limited to 1 day and 1 night. So it says the B'raisa, when it says in Parshas Tzav Boy, let me just read out the verse by heart. It says, that's the general carbon shlamim that you bring in because you made a vow, you made a donation. So the Torah says clearly, Biyoim hakrivoy ezivchoy yeyachel, on the day that you brought it, you can eat it. Umi machras, and you can eat it tomorrow. And v'hanoiser mimenu yeyachel, you can eat it on the first day and on the second day. Okay. So it says im, and we're going to learn from the word im nadaroy nadava. So that's limeid al chagigas. The word im is adding the chagigas yudalit. Al chagigas yudalit, just like the pasuk in Sav explicitly is saying you can eat it on the day that it was brought. Biyoim hakriva yezivcha yeyachel umi machras. So that also includes lebeis lam v'laylach. Now the problem will be, okay, first of all, we already got the whole thing, because the fact that we have to bring proofs that boiker means boiker sheni, that's the kasha against Rav Kahana, which means if you don't have that proof, boiker means boiker rishon. Nukuda. So Rav Kahana there's a kasha on Rav Kahana. The problem in this brayse is that the brayse already said that the pasuk in the A, the fact that it says bayoim harishon la boiker, that already implies you shechted on the erev, so there's the 14th, bayoim harishon la boiker means boiker sheni. Why did he need the other pasuk and Sav? So Amar Mar Oyene Ela Boker Rishon. So ask Gemara, why would you say Boker Rishon? Ha'amrat, you just explained that since the pasuk in A adds the words by Yom Harishon, and then you have the word La Boker, Hare Boker Sheni Amar. So answers the Gemara explaining the B'raisa Hachika Amar Oyene Ela B'Shtei Chagigas HaKosav Medaber. If you only would have had the pasuk in A, yes, the pasuk begins with Lo Yolin Min Habasar Asher Tisbach Bo'erev Bayoim Harishon. I would not have said that this pasuk is only speaking about Chagigas Yud Dalid. One might have learned that pasuk is speaking about two separate Chagigas. There's the Chagiga that you bring on the 14th, and then, as we have been learning, there's another Chagiga that is called Shalmei Chagiga that's brought on the 15th. And maybe the pasuk is saying that each one of these can only be eaten on 1 day and 1 night. The 14th on the 14th and the night, and the one that's brought on the 15th, that is the one that can be eaten by Yom Harishon La Boker, because the Chagigas has vav taka, only if you can only eat it until the morning of the 16th, it's also only Yom V'Layla. That's the kasha that the Gemara, that the B'raisa is trying to farenfit. Maybe the pasuk is alluding to two chagigos. Achas chagigas yudalet, va'achas chagigas tezvav. And each one can only be eaten for one day and one night. The Zula Boikra, Chagigas Yudalet can, maybe, that's the kasha, maybe only until the morning of the 15th. The one that you bring on the 15th, maybe you can only eat it until the 16th. So for that, Hadar Amar Elam. So the Brisa says it can be, because since the Kaimelon, it's a rule that everyone knows that Chagiga could be eaten for 2 days and one night. In Kain, in Neder, or in Adava, Bimai, what will that possibly be referring to? Now, we said the word im is including. It's including one of these two. So, if aside of the general shlamim, that's clear in the Pasuk and Sav, it's 2 days and one night, and you have the word im, which is including one of these chagigas, so which one is it including? I chagigas yudalid, if you are erroneously learning the Pshat and Parshas Re'eh only 1 day and one night, no, the Pasuk and Sav cannot be referring to that when the Pasuk and Sav says clearly that by Yom HaKriva Yezivcha Yeyachal Umimachnas. And if it's alluding to Hagigas Tezvav, again, Yom V'layla. So Elot must be that high, the Pasuk and Sav, right? Let's go, it's referring to Hagigas Tezvav. And therefore, the entire Pasuk of Re'eh is Hagigas Yudalid. Fakert, there's two psukim. One pasuk is telling you that Chagigas Tezvav has 2 days and one night, like Shlamim. The pasuk in the A is telling you Chagigas Yudalit has 2 days and one night. The He'ech Kul Ekral Chagigas Yudalit Limeid Al Chagigas Yudalit Shenechal. Okay. Now that we explained the Brais, you have to fakert. You have to say because of the pasuk, the im that you have in Parshas Sav, that all chagigos, all shlamims have 2 days and one night. But the proof that we have from Parshas Re'eh, now that we established that Parshas Re'eh is clearly speaking about chagigas yudalad, but it's only speaking about chagigas yudalad, by Yom HaRishon la boiker means boiker sheni. Talmud diksiv Rishon boiker, the my boiker sheni, which means that ha kol heichad diksiv boiker stama, the default boiker is boiker rishon, va'afagav diksiv boireishis. So this was the kasha. Rava says that he's telling Abaye, don't find for Rabbi Yosef's kasha is a good kasha. Rav Kahana's din is emes, but the limud was not needed. Okay, with this we conclude this. The good thing is that no one is arguing the din. Bottom line is that aside of what we learned yesterday, Shitas Ben Tema, all of the chagigos associated to Yom Tiv is a typical shlamim with all of the, so to say, the leniencies, which include that the psar shlamim can be eaten for 2 days and one night. Okay, Chavre, let us start the new Mishnah. So HaPesach, let's go back to the beginning of Elu Devarim. Pesach overrides Shabbos. And we're being Machal Shabbos. In other words, you're doing Shechita. But you can only do Shechita if you fulfill the obligation of Pesach. And like we mentioned, if a person is Machal Shabbos B'shoigig, normally the rule is Yechayev Chatos. So says the Mishnah, HaPesach, Sheshachatoi, Shaloi L'Shmoi, you shechted it l'shem shlamim, and as we learned in the beginning of Masechta Zvachim, that kol hazvachim, right, shenisbechu shaloi l'shman, is ksherin, which will be very helpful in a moment in the Mishnah. It's only that li'olu l'ba'olam l'shem chayva, but epes ha-mitzvah you did. But there are exceptions. Pesach and Achatos. Let's speak about a Pesach. If a Pesach was bought l'shem anything, l'shem oil, l'shem shlamim, l'shem any other carbon, then it's bechlal not kosher. So the concept that we're going to be speaking about, that we spoke out in the intro, toya b'dvar mitzvah is some mitzvah needed to happen. If a person intended to do a mitzvah and zero mitzvah was done, which is a Pesach that was sorted shaloi l'shma, it's not only that loy olu l'ba'olam l'shem chayva. It's garnished. You have to stop the avodah. So nothing was accomplished. Here for sure, you're going to be chayiv. The Shabbos chayiv chatos. Now chayiv chatos means there has to be some shoygig involved. It means if you have the kohen that not only purposefully had a machsheva shaloi l'shmoi, but he knew that you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, then he's not going to be chayiv chatos. That's a person who's machal Shabbos b'mezid. But there is a shoygig aspect over here. Maybe for a moment he forgot that it's Shabbos. Give you an example. Maybe he forgot that you can't shecht on Shabbos. He wasn't even focusing. And on top of that, I'm saying he made a shaloi l'shmoi. So if there was a shoygig involved, you can't say, well, at least they began to shech the Pesach. The Koren was designated for a Pesach. It's a toya b'dvar mitzvah. No one puts this in the category of toya b'dvar mitzvah. However, next, v'shar kol hazvachim, that you're shechting them on Shabbos. L'shem Pesach. Now what happens for another carbon that you shech l'shem Pesach? Really, there's a machlekes tanoim when the Mishnah says in Zvachim that all of the karbanis that are shechted shaloi l'shman, they're ksherin ela shaloi olu l'bal l'shem chayva chutz mi Pesach v'chatos. For sure, the Mishnah means if a Pesach is brought for a shlamim, it's worth nothing. But what about any other carbon that's brought l'shem Pesach? Our Tana follow those opinions that say the carbon is kosher. Let's say if it was a shlamim and it was brought l'shem Pesach, it's not a Pesach and it's not a shlamim, but a mitzvah was done. The avodah continues. A carbon was brought to the Eibishter. So a mitzvah, there's some mitzvah aspect that happened. Now another detail, says the Mishnah.
What happened? What do they do with it in that case? Do they get to eat it?
They sprinkled up. They put the blood on the mizbeach. They sprinkled the blood, and the kohanim get to eat the meat. You continue to do the avodah, but for whatever it was brought for, that was not fulfilled. So if I, for example, if I undertook a neder to bring a shlamim, and the kohen shechted it l'shem Pesach, according to our Mishnah, according to some Tanoim, you continue doing the avodah, but I have to bring another shlamim. Now, hold on. Another very important nuance. If the animal, we learned shlamim has very little restrictions. It can be male and female. A shlamim can be tzoyin and bakar. So I had a shlamim, I had a cattle, I had an eglah, I had a little calf, I had a female calf, and the kohen brings it l'shem Pesach, kosher carbon. There is some mitzvah aspect here, but it's so far removed from a Pesach because this animal type is never fit for a carbon Pesach. Again, everyone will hold, I'm still chayv chatas. The kohen who did it is chayv chatas. No one will apply the toya b'dvar mitzvah. The mitzvah is beautiful. There's a concept, but we are limiting the concept. Still chayv chatas. The area where we'll have the machlekes tanoim is that if there was a carbon designated for a shlamim, but it was a lamb, and it was male, and it was within the first year, it had all of the characteristics that would have qualified it for a carbon Pesach. It was a shlamim, but it was brought for a Pesach. So Imru Uyenheim, Rabbi Eliezer, who's the Machmir, says, I don't care. Even true, the animal is not completely invalidated. And I know that the intention was for Pesach, and Pesach could be done on Shabbos. But it wasn't a Pesach. It's not fulfilling anyone's obligation. So therefore, you violated the Shechita. You got to bring a Chat Mechayev. The novelty of the Mishnah is the Shita of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says that you're potter. Guys, let's read inside the Rashi, 7 lines under the Gemara, right, in the wide lines, but Rabbi Yeshua pointed, the Kosova, Rabbi Yeshua is the one that describes that Torah b'dvar mitzvah. If you were intending to do a mitzvah, you didn't do it correctly. As long as v'asa mitzvah kol duhu, some mitzvah needed to happen. If you intended to do a mitzvah and what you did is 0 mitzvah, even Rabbi Yeshua will not call you a toya b'dvar mitzvah. But like we mentioned, our Mishnah, like Rashi says, is following the opinion that holds that a shlamim that's brought l'shem Pesach is not like a Pesach that's brought l'shem anything else. That's completely puzzle. It is kosher. So there is a mitzvah kol duhu, and the animal type could have been fit. It had all of the qualifications that is needed for a carbon Pesach. So Rabbi Yeshua therefore applies the rule that toya b'dvar mitzvah is exempt from achatos. How great is that? Okay. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. It's beautiful that in these Mishnayos, the Mishnah Rabbeinu HaKadosh is recording the debate that they had, like we had in the beginning of the Perek. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer, hold on. Uma ima Pesach. If the carbon itself was a Pesach, shu muter l'shmai, if you bring it properly, l'shem Pesach, on Shabbos, Pesach is doichel Shabbos. Nevertheless, the Mishnah began in the areas that everyone is in consent with, that kishashina eshemai for Pesach is brought l'shem anything else. For example, it was brought l'shem shlamim, then everyone agrees that you're chayiv, like we explained. That's why Rashi added the words that not only does Rabbi Yeshua speaks about a toya b'dvar mitzvah, but it has to be va'asa mitzvah kol duhu, Rashi added. When you bring a Pesach l'shul shlamim, since the rule is it's not good at all, forget about you're not yoytzer. There isn't any mitzvah involved. Even Rabbi Yeshua is not going to say, well, you had good intentions. No, it doesn't help you. You violated the Shabbos. B'shoigig, fine. You're not chayiv kados. You're not going to get skila, but you're chayiv chatas. So it says Rabbi Eliezer, if the animal began an animal that taka may be brought if it would have been done properly. Nevertheless, you are agreeing with me that if it was butcher loylishma yechayiv chatas. So any other zvachim, which may not be brought on Shabbos, as the rule is generally a carbon yachid may not be brought on Shabbos, shem asurim, even if you bring them lishmam. So what are you telling me that kishashina esheman, that now that you brought a carbon that you can't bring on Shabbos? You brought a shlamim that may not be bring, and you didn't even bring the shlamim correct. The ba'alim of the shlamim wasn't even in fulfillment of his or her obligation. So somehow kishashina shemam for a Pesach, are you telling me that there's no chiyuv chatas? It doesn't make sense. Einoy din, that of course you're going to be chayiv. And Rabbi Yeshua says, no, that's my whole point. It's not what the animal was, it's what your intention was for. You know, the Rebbe explains many arguments between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, like their names. Rabbi Eliezer means help. God should be my helper, oizer. Yeshua is salvation. Salvation from God is like a miracle. Salvation is coming from a place that's much greater than a help. Help is like nature. It's all the oivishter, but it's melubish b'darchi ateva. Hashem yeh oizerli. And Yeshua is, I need a echdafai Yeshua is when someone is saying by the laws of nature, I'm not paying my bills this month. I need a psai Yeshua. It's Rabbi Yeshua is tapping into a level of God that's beyond nature. The higher you go, the more valuable your intention is. In the physical world, intentions, you could have had the best intentions. They're not tangible. Rabbi Yeshua takes into account your kavanah more than Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Yeshua says like this: Im amrad bePesach ki sheshinu b'davar aser. I know that Pesach, if it would have been brought l'shem Pesach, is a mitzvah. But if you intended it for a shlamim, I'm looking at what you intended it for. I'm not looking at the past. I'm looking at the future. So yeah, since you intended it for a shlamim may not be brought on Shabbos. So that's why I say Yachayv Chatos, your intention was not good. The animal was not good because Shalai L'Shemai, it's not good. The intention was for something not good. However, I'm putting my leniency, Taimar, the second white line, by any zevach, let's say by a shlamim. If you shechted it for a Pesach, the davar hamutar means for a Pesach, or I'll tell you something else. Okay, so then avada, shlamim shem Pesach, tabad var mitzvah, and you did a mitzvah kol dehu, you're going to be exempt from achatas. Amar le Rabbi Eliezer, I don't know, that emuri sibur, yoichichu, emurim here doesn't mean only emurim, also emurim. Emurim means the whole carbon, excuse me. And Rabbi Eliezer is bringing a raya against Rabbi Yeshua from your Talmud, like we learned. Talmud is brought on Shabbos. 2 Tamidim are brought on Shabbos. Not only Talmud, Musaf, 2 Musafim are brought every Shabbos. 4 Karbanis are brought on Shabbos. Emurit Tzibur means the carbon Talmud. Let's go. Yerchichu, that if they are brought on Shabbos Lishman, they're good. Now, for some reason, and this is both Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer hold that if a Talmud, right, v'hashoichet lishman, if you take a shlamim, and you bring it on Shabbos l'shem Talmud, according to Rabbi Yeshua, maybe you should be potter, right? Shlamim l'shem Talmud. There's a mitzvah called duhu. It's not Pesach involved. You had a good intention.
We're talking where the animal you're bringing would theoretically be fit for a Talmud, right?
The animal that we're fitting, the same case in the Mishnah. So Rabbi Eliezer tells Rabbi Yeshua that you're not consistent with yourself. If your logic is that if a person is intending to do a mitzvah and they accomplish some mitzvah aspect, so therefore they should be potter from achatas. No, you yourself are moided to me that a shlamim, like Danny said, a shlamim, that the animal type, it has all the characteristics needed for the Talmud. If it was brought l'shem Talmud, but it was not a Talmud, it was a shlamim. And takek shedim, like all the ba'alim. In other words, the owner will have to bring another shlamim. Everyone says you're chayv chatas. Why? Toivet var mitzvah. That's a good kasha. So
a Talmud is not, like a shlamim is something that anyone can bring. I can't bring a Talmud. Talmud is considered a.
So what?
Imagine I go and I bring a chatas for you. I can't bring a chatas for you.
I know that, but then so what? You're almost there. You need one more word. In other words, when you speak about a shoygig, there's a fine line where you tell the person that your negligence of not finding out what's going on over here, are you a shoygig? Was it an inadvertent act? Was it an accidental act? You should have done a little bit more research. How much research did you need to do? So there's a certain amount of information that it's almost negligence for you not noticing what's going on. There's a certain amount of awareness that we all have to have. And if you don't even have that awareness, then it's negligent. That's going to be the answer of Rabbi Yeshua, which is Gavaldik. So I'm going to Rabbi Yeshua like this. Loy, I agree with you. I'm not debating you. Shlamim brought on Shabbos, L'Shem Tamid, B'shoygeg, Chayev Chatas. You know why? Im amrad be'emurei tzibur. Again, emurim, he's just using the same words. Emurim is not only the emurim, it's the whole korban tzibur. Since sheyesh lehem kitzba, this is mamash beautiful. There is a limited amount of korbanos tzibur that override Shabbos. We mentioned Shabbos. 2 tamids, 2 musafs, 4 animals. There's only 4 animals that can be brought in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. So there was my shlamim. Then you were trying to get there. So what? The Kohen did not know that this animal is a shlamim from a yachid? What, he didn't see that in the Beis HaMikdash they just brought a tamid, or they are about to bring a tamid in the afternoon? Like, it's so easy to be aware that this animal is not the tamid or not the musaf, because there's very few karbanis that could be brought. That is called negligence. That's not called shtoya b'dvar mitzvah. Pesach is very different. Every Jew has to bring a Pesach. What did we just learn a few daf ago? They made a census, 1,200,000. Forget about the Chagigas Yudalad. When there's a tremendous amount of karbanos being brought, then any other animal in the Azara, someone will think this must be a Pesach. And Rashi adds a beautiful, we'll get to Rashi. I want to read it inside in the Mishnah. Rashi adds a beautiful nuance, Azam Tzayim nuance. And Rashi, 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid says, Shahakol tzarichim lakach. You go into the Beis, you go into the Azara, packed with animals, and everyone is busy doing a mitzvah. And Rashi wants to add something, but still, whose animal is it? So Rashi adds a nuance. If you go into the Beis HaMikdash out of Pesach, guys, think about this. What should you do if you see a lamb running around? I mentioned this. I'm just being practical. People lost their animals. What would you do? If you see a lamb, there's 500,000 people in the Azara, and you see a lamb running around, what would you do?
You're not going to try the lamb and ask who it belongs to.
Exactly. You would slaughter it. Because you presume you're going to go find the owner, a needle in a haystack, take the animal, shech the animal. And when you shech it, you'll say, whoever this belongs to, that's the Korban Pesach. And why would you think it's a shlamim? That's called a shoygig. That's not called negligence. That's what Rashi adds. And it's even though you know you brought yours, because if you have to know whose it belongs to, then you can also say it's an act of negligence. Why didn't you find out who owns it? Rashi doesn't give these words. I'm just saying that there's so many people, so many animals. What are you going to do? You grab the lamb and you shecht it. That's what the guy did. And he did it with L'Shem Pesach because he had
to find the owner afterwards. He
doesn't have to find the. He doesn't have to find it. We just learned above that b'diavad if you don't eat the meat. He says, whoever this is for, I'm shechting it. How did they bring 1,200,000 animals? I'm asking you in a couple of hours if they would have to go find out which animal belongs to whom. They're moving. You take an animal and you're doing a mitzvah for your fellow. So therefore, that's called a shoygig. Now, the premise of his question was that a shlamim brought for a tamid is chayiv. I want you to know, says the Mishnah, but the whole premise of your question is not good. No. Rav Meir holds with Rabbi Yeshua. Rav Meir was also, we were not yoydev l'soif datoi. Rav Meir puts a lot of chashivus on machshava, on the inner world, on the higher world. So Rav Meir says, no, it's consistent. That if a person takes a shlamim, that you did it l'shem tamid, then you take a potter. Hatoye b'dvar mitzvah, v'asa mitzvah, kol du your potter. Now, the Mishnah is going to, let's finish. Let's finish. The Mishnah is going to give other just scenarios, just to point this nakuda out, is that when a korban Pesach is brought improperly, let's go with Rabbi Yeshua. Sometimes you won't be chayiv chatas because you were toy with dvar mitzvah. Sometimes you won't bring a chatas because it's called an oinus. That's another, what's a shoygig? Where does the shoygig again, and where do we say it was completely unavoidable? It was completely out of your control. You're not even called a shoygig. So it says the Mishnah, only shaloi la'eichlav. People, we said it's not people that halachically cannot eat it. People that physically can't eat it. They're old. They can't eat it. They can't eat a kazayis in this month. Or you shechted it only for people that were not pre-registered, or only for adelim, or only for tameim. So then you're chayiv. Why are you chayiv? Because again, we're not going to say, okay, here we're not going to say that what? We're not going to say that you were toya b'dvar mitzvah. That's the code of the Mishnah is. Because how are you toya b'dvar? You're shechting it for people that can't eat it. I think that word is, it's called negligent. However, la'oichlav, shaloi la'oichlav.
So why a chatos?
No. Chayiv chatos shleim is because he didn't do it b'mezid. No. But he's saying, in other words, shleim like this. Really, we're going to learn this also in the Zikin. It's not shoygig mezid. It's oinus. Then you have a shoygig hakarav lo'oinus. Then you have a shoygig. Then you have a shoygig hakarav lo'mezid. Then you have a mezid. In other words, this toya b'dvar mitzvah is in a very limited area. If it's a grubba mistake, it's still called a shoygig. I'm not saying it's amazing, but you're not going to be exempted. On the other hand, if you did it lo'oichlav v'shaloi la'oichlav, which happens to be the dual intent, which is like a kosher, because no sin was done. Another example, if you shecht an animal and the animal was blemished, a blemish means that you can see when you look at the animal that this animal is not good. Okay? So you're going to be chayv chatas again. Shleim chayv chatas means it must be that the kohen didn't know that you can't bring a balmum, but you can't say you're toy b'dvar mitzvah. You should have known. It's like a grubba shoygig. It's a shoygig karav lemezid. However, if you shechted an animal and afterwards you discovered that, with the semani treifas that we had in Chulin, some of them are discernible, right? If the animal is missing a leg, but some of them are beseised. So here you're putted. Now here it's important, Chavim, when we're finishing today's shiur. Putted here is not only according to Rabbi Yeshua. If you shecht any animal on Shabbos that you may shecht on Shabbos, and then you discovered that there was a lechele, that there was a sircha in the lungs, you're putted. That's called an oinus. This is not a toy b'dvar mitzvah. You can't even call this a shoygig. What should the person do? The animal looked okay. Then you discovered that the animal is not okay. You're putted completely. Similarly, you shechted the animal, and v'noida shemashchua ba'olam es yadon shemesu. That all of the owners, before Shechita, they withdraw themselves from being registered. Or all of the owners passed away. Or Shenitmu. Now, you did not know that. There was no way you can know that. So that is not called Toy B'dvar Mitzvah. Here again, says the Mishnah, Pater Mepnei Sheshachat B'Rishus, like the Rashi writes at the end of the Mishnah, She'anusu, D'loi hoyo yedea shekain, V'loi hoyo loi livdoi kalkach. So the concepts are beautiful. So there's some mistake that will be so difficult to discover prior. We don't even call that a shoygig. But there's some mistakes that even Rabbi Yeshua will hold. You should have known. Don't give me a toy b'dvar mitzvah. You have to treat the danger. Everyone toy b'dvar mitzvah. There are scenarios where toy b'dvar mitzvah, you did a mitzvah. Machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer is the machmir and Rabbi Yeshua is the mekel. And God willing to be continued.
Yeah.
Yeah.